even if you use the more quote unquote conservative Bitcoin models like the power law model, I think a lot of people tend to be surprised with like how soon they could theoretically retire if, the price of Bitcoin does follow some sort of power law into the future for many, many decades, which I think seems very reasonable from my personal perspective. You actually may not need as much Bitcoin as you think you might need. If you have, if you've been working a corporate job for 10 years or so, or 20 years, and you've got a big nest egg of stocks in your 401k, adding a little bit of Bitcoin, not even that much Bitcoin, can make a big difference in your future retirement. So like that's another interesting way to frame it when you're playing around with this calculator, seeing like, okay, just a little bit of Bitcoin can actually be enough to like really accelerate your retirement.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm here with Director of Market Research at Unchained.com. Joe, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. So if you don't mind, can you tell us what was your journey into Bitcoin?
Yeah, it's a great question. I can start this slightly differently than I've historically started it in other podcasts, maybe a little unique and different. Maybe my Bitcoin journey somewhat started like at a very young age for me, like maybe middle school. I was interested in like money itself and finance, and I was also interested in like computer science and programming. So I had in middle school I had taught myself to build Android applications, and one of the apps that I built back then was called commodity prices. And I came to that because I noticed people were searching commodity prices in the Android App Store, the Google Play Store, whatever it was called. And that would be one of the common search terms, yet there was not a app at the time that would just be for simply commodity prices. So I was like, okay, well, this could be an interesting one. Like I had heard about gold. I was interested in gold as like a form of sound money, even though I was really young and may not have completely connected the dots on like fiat money, sound money, and obviously Bitcoin even existed at the time. And so I was like, all right, well, I'm going to build this app called Commodity Prices. And at the time, I think it was either like 2011 or 2012, I used the Yahoo Finance API for commodity prices. And unfortunately, they didn't have Bitcoin as one of the, units or commodities in the API. So I like to think that back then I had to have been very, very close to discovering Bitcoin. And like with my background being interested in like money, finance, investing, and then also computer science, I like to think that I would have, saw it and then dug into it as aggressively, but unfortunately missed it. Don't remember ever seeing it. And then fast forward to the 2017 bull market. By then I'm in college, and again still interested in computer science, still interested in investing. And I remember seeing the price of Bitcoin just going crazy, right? Like it started 2017 at like $1,000, then it went to 2,000 to 3,000, eventually six, and then to 18, 20-ish by the end of the year. And I growing up, I had always thought like, okay, when you invest and save for the future, you buy things like IBM or Coca-Cola, like blue chip dividend stocks that have been around for decades. They don't go up really fast, but they do pay like a 2 to 3% dividend yield that's, relatively safe over a long period of time. And so this Bitcoin thing kind of interested me because the number was going up so fast. And I was like, what even is this space? This is obviously some sort of bubble or greater fool theory. And you know, but being interested in computer science and investing, I was like, all right, you know what? Like, there's got to be something here. Like, the market is kind of like screaming that there's something to do with Bitcoin or crypto or whatnot. So at first, I bought a couple $100 of Bitcoin just to see how what it was and try to learn more about it. And then the price kept going up all throughout 2017, and I was like, amazed by what was happening and confused. And then all throughout 2018, I really dug into like which was the bear market. So Bitcoin had already peaked at $20,000, and it was on its way back down to $3,000 by the end of 2018. And all throughout that year, I just was trying to read everything that I could about Bitcoin. The Nakamoto Institute was like one of the foundational pieces of, or libraries of content that I was reading back then. I was DMing people like Pierre Richard, who's currently VP of Research at Riot Platforms, and asking him a bunch of very basic questions about Bitcoin and Bitcoin versus crypto and like why Bitcoin is important. And he really kind of set me on the right path to understanding Bitcoin in like a relatively short amount of time back then. And then, throughout that bear market, I just kept diving deeper and deeper into Bitcoin, and the price, like I mentioned, continued to trend toward $3,000, down, 80 something percent. And by the time it got to 3,000, I was like, this just makes so much sense. Like, I don't see how this is wrong. Like, I would go listen to someone on CNBC or Bloomberg or read expert, articles that are talking about Bitcoin, and like, it appeared to me that a lot of the quote unquote experts just haven't done their research on what Bitcoin was. And that's who I was betting against. So I was like, all right, well, I'm going to keep buying a lot more of this. And I did. And then after that, it was kind of off to the races. It went from 3,000 to now $100,000 today. And I've been kind of absolutely fascinated with it ever since. And I still think that it's, very early in the future of Bitcoin.
You mentioned gold and S&P. Do you still have stocks, or you just pure solely into Bitcoin?
Without like diving into too much details of like my personal portfolio, Bitcoin is obviously a very, very significant portion. I've had stocks for a very long time, and some of them I haven't sold for Bitcoin. But I see that more as like a hedge on, maybe I'm wrong about Bitcoin, because I don't think I don't know how I'm necessarily wrong, but it's possible in my mind that I could be wrong. So yes, I do have some S&P 500.
Do you see Bitcoin as a store of value or a currency?
I view Bitcoin as a form of money. Michael Saylor refers to it as like digital capital. I think that's another way to think about it. For most people, a way to think about it is probably store of value, but I do think it's money. And I think it's money because Bitcoin has unique monetary properties. It's immutably scarce, it's portable, it's durable, it's divisible, and it's fungible. And it started from zero, right? Like all monies and all things kind of have to start from zero. And as Bitcoin got distributed over time, the early stages of Bitcoin adoption are going to be massive growth if Bitcoin happens to be the best form of money. And I think that's exactly what's been happening over the last 16 years is Bitcoin has been growing at a 100% plus compound annual growth rate because it started from zero, and it's probably worth, in market cap, many, many trillions of dollars. And so it's like people people are definitely very confused by the volatility in Bitcoin and like whether that makes it a good store of value or a bad store of value per se. But it's like, if Bitcoin is the best form of money and it started from zero, like it had to have started from zero, then the only way for it to become money and to become a medium of exchange would be for it to grow absolutely massively. And that's exactly what's been happening for the last 16 years. And I kind of expect that to continue happening for the next 16 years. I think like maybe once, most humans recognize that Bitcoin is the best form of money and they're actually storing a large chunk of their personal savings in Bitcoin, then I think the volatility would probably die down to some extent. And then Bitcoin would be used more as like a currency and as the way people think about money today. So yeah, I think like today, the best way to think about it for most people is Bitcoin is long-term savings technology, meaning it's a store of value, but it's not a short-term store of value per se. It's more of a long-term store of value. There's going to be a lot of volatility in the short term, like it has been for the last 16 years. But I think that volatility is mainly due to its massive growth. Obviously, Bitcoin can't grow 100% per year in a perfectly exponential line. Like that would get front run. People would bid it up way too high. There would be an aggressive parabolic bull market. And then we would have a massive bear market. And that's exactly what's been happening for the last 16 years. We have these crazy bull markets and these crazy bear markets. And I think personally, from my perspective, I think that's just because Bitcoin has been growing at an unprecedented rate.
Are you expecting still the cycles to be with us?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think like last cycle going into from 2020 going into 2021, I incorrectly took the perspective that cycles might be over and like this could be some either a long-term bull market for Bitcoin or like some form of like early hyper Bitcoinization where it's like things have actually changed. And, and that was obviously wrong, I guess. Bitcoin ended up going to 69,000 or whatever the peak was in 2021, and then ultimately fell down to 16 or so thousand in 2022. So I'm hesitant to suggest that cycles are over this time. I definitely do think you made a great point. Like, with the United States potentially passing something like Senator Lummis's Bitcoin Act, where the United States is actively going to go out into the market and purchase a million Bitcoin over 4 years. I think that would be a paradigm shift in, like, the history of Bitcoin and the history of money. And so that could actually change things, or at the very least, it would make it probably a significantly larger bull market this cycle compared to the previous cycle. But one, I guess I'm hesitant that the Bitcoin Act will actually get passed. Unfortunately, I hope it does. I think America would be better off, and the world would probably be better off if we can accelerate global Bitcoin adoption. But I don't know if that will actually happen. And who knows if that doesn't happen, and say the US starts this sovereign wealth fund and they accumulate MicroStrategy or a position in Bitcoin, a smaller position in Bitcoin through that fund. Maybe that causes a pretty massive bull market, which I would expect it would. But I don't know if that would necessarily end the cycle. So personally, I lean towards the cycles are probably going to continue. But that's no guarantee that they would. And there's always a risk that at a certain point, governments and central banks are going to learn that there's this new form of unprintable money, and they all have money printers. And so it's like they're going to eventually they're going to figure out that they can print money to buy the only form of unprintable money that has ever existed. And once one of them does that, and does that to a large scale, or and they do it publicly, then it seems like it's kind of the potential end game for fiat money, and we would just be at a race to accumulate as much Bitcoin as you possibly can, while people are still willing to accept pieces of paper for immutable absolute scarcity.
I've been watching a bunch of your videos, by the way. Guys, as always, in the description, you will find Joe's channel. Give him a follow if you're not, because you produce some really good content. And I wanted to ask you, speaking of potential longer cycles, speaking about Bitcoin being money, you made a couple of videos about Bitcoin retirement, how much Bitcoin you need. What's your view here? Because I love your take, and you could sort out your retirement. I mean, where the idea came from to produce these videos, because I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah, one, I really appreciate that. Means a lot. And yeah, definitely everyone, if you haven't found my channel, it'd be great to go and subscribe. But yeah, so this idea of like a Bitcoin focused retirement kind of started with at Unchained, which is where I work. We created this something called the Bitcoin retirement calculator. It's at unchained.com/calculator. It's perfectly free. Anyone can go check it out and enter their own inputs. And obviously, what I say here is not financial advice, and what is on the calculator is not financial advice. It's just you can plug and choose your own model, whether it's the power law model, the Sailor 24 model, or even the stock to flow model, or just a fixed compound annual growth rate for Bitcoin. But what's really cool about the calculator is you can go insert your inputs. You can be like, okay, I have this much in stocks, this much in Bitcoin, this much in real estate, this much in bonds. And then you can set the expected growth rates or the price growth rate models for those assets. For example, Bitcoin has models, like I mentioned. And then you can see, okay, I want to retire by age 50 or 55 or 60 or whatever it might be. And you can set your estimated annual expenses in retirement. And then you can see if your retirement might be sustainable or unsustainable. So it's a pretty cool calculator. And like, even if you use the more quote unquote conservative Bitcoin models like the power law model, I think a lot of people tend to be surprised with like how soon they could theoretically retire if the price of Bitcoin does follow some sort of power law into the future for many decades, which I think it seems very reasonable from my personal perspective. So it's really cool, and like you actually may not need as much Bitcoin as you think you might need. And you can also, one of the other things that's really interesting is like, if you have, if you've been working a corporate job for 10 years or so, or 20 years, and you've got a big nest egg of stocks and your 401k, adding a little bit of Bitcoin, not even that much Bitcoin, can make a big difference in your future retirement. So like that's another interesting way to frame it when you're playing around with this calculator, seeing like, okay, just a little bit of Bitcoin can actually be enough to like really accelerate your retirement. So first, the specifics of like when can you retire, it's like it's probably best for you to like play with the calculator yourself and use your own inputs and use your own annual expenses. Obviously, like different geographic locations, someone could live off X amount, someone in New York City might need 10x that amount, right? And it just depends on your lifestyle. So it's a pretty cool calculator, and we got a lot of positive feedback on the calculator and the videos that were kind of highlighting like, how much Bitcoin do you really need to retire in 5 years or 10 years. So it's a pretty cool calculator.
It's funny. I was watching a video on CNBC today, which was I think it's early 2019, with Tom Lee was as a guest, and he was discussing with the host, and he was saying, well, just put 1 or 2%. And the lady was like, oh, this is crazy. Why would you put 2%? And Bitcoin was at $5,000. So it's crazy how much has changed now with ETFs. And oh my God, now it seems like 2 to 5% is like not even that bullish if you think about it.
Yeah. Very related to that. I've started to think about this a little bit more recently. Like Bitcoin potentially didn't really like, obviously Bitcoin started in, the white paper came out on October 31st, 2008. The first block was mined January 3rd, 2009. But like Bitcoin was a toy and just like a game for a very, very long time. Like you had Hal Finney in the forums suggesting like $10 million Bitcoin like very early. But like, did he actually put like all of his net worth into Bitcoin when it first started? Like probably not. Um, and I think like most people really never did that at all. I think like Saylor may have been basically like the first person to like really invest a substantial amount of existing wealth into Bitcoin. And so you can almost argue that like Bitcoin didn't really start until 2020 to some extent, like in terms of like real capital being allocated into Bitcoin. And so it's like we're really early. People don't realize how early we are. And just like you said, like, 2 to 5% was laughed at just in 2019, right before Saylor. Arguably, it's still probably laughed at for a majority of people in the world. And even the most bullish people on Bitcoin probably don't have the Saylor like conviction, where Saylor is like saying, you should go triple maxi and have 100% or more than 100% with leverage of your portfolio in Bitcoin or like Bitcoin adjacent assets like MicroStrategy. So it's like, it's still very, very, very early in my opinion. And like, if we're right about Bitcoin and Bitcoin is the best form of money, which I obviously think it is, then that's probably the rational thing to do. And if that's the rational thing to do, there's probably like maybe like a few thousand people in the world that are actually doing it to that extreme level of conviction. And if you have wealth outside of Bitcoin, you're probably going to continue underperforming Bitcoin just like you have. That's, it's obviously been the case for the last 16 years. And so it's like, it's a lot earlier than I think many people think it is.
I've asked ChatGPT this morning. There is, I mean, according to the source, I don't know how accurate, but let's say there is about 7% of the population in crypto, right? And half of it, more or less, is Bitcoin. So we have what, 3.5% of the people in Bitcoin nowadays. And like you said, the trap is the price. Because people look at, oh, $100,000, I missed it, right? Whether in fact it's 2 trillion is nothing. Like if you think about in terms of market cap, I mean, gold is more or less 18. So do you think we will catch eventually gold in terms of market cap?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think so. I think that the Bitcoin gold parity level is probably like it's the most bearish case for Bitcoin that I think I can think of beyond like a global thermonuclear war or the end of times occurring, which could happen, anything could happen. But I think, yeah, like, if gold is an 18 to $20 trillion asset, Bitcoin is, in my opinion, vastly superior than gold, not just the equivalent of gold. Like if gold, is a $20 trillion asset, we're still mining 1 to 2% per year of new gold that's being sold on the market. That's, 200 to $400 billion worth of gold that's being mined every single year. And as technology gets better and better, we're only going to be able to mine more and more gold. Like people forget that 1 to 2% is good for a monetary tool on earth. Like there's not really a before Bitcoin, there was not really a better monetary tool than gold. They could all get mined or created at a faster rate than gold did, but still gold leaks. Like there's an there's more and more gold that gets mined every year, and as technology gets better and better, that could potentially increase significantly. And so Bitcoin is this one monetary asset that literally doesn't leak, has an infinite stock to flow ratio. Gold has a stock to flow ratio of, 25, 50 or whatever it might be. And I think that's a really big difference that people don't really fully grasp. So yeah, I definitely think that Bitcoin, the bear case for Bitcoin is, 800,000 to $1 million per Bitcoin, which I think like literally could happen in a very short amount of time. And then once you realize like, okay, well, Bitcoin is not just gold, or it's not just digital gold, it's better than gold. It's more scarce, it's more portable, it's arguably more durable, it's more fungible, it has all of these more superior monetary properties. Then you realize like, oh my gosh, like this could be multiples or magnitudes more valuable than gold. It's almost like saying, Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone and then Apple invented the iPhone. It's like, what's more valuable to the world? Like, was the original telephone, was that like a great investment? Yes, it was a great investment, but like how much more valuable is Apple compared to the original telephone company? It's almost probably infinitely more valuable. And I think that that's exactly, what's probably going to happen with Bitcoin. Like when new technology comes out, the world becomes a vastly better place. We all benefit as a whole, and the new technology is typically a lot more valuable than the old technology, even if you're assuming both at peak adoption rates. So yeah, I think Bitcoin will eventually meet gold and probably will significantly eclipse gold in total market cap.
In the adoption curve, I agree. It's super early days. Bitcoin shares the podium with other cryptocurrencies, and I encourage people always to check the price of other assets like Ethereum and all sorts of Solana, also other assets versus Bitcoin, as opposed to US dollar,
Yep.
for example, because when you chart everything versus Bitcoin, everything is going down. So do you still see Ethereum competing for the number two, XRP, Solana? Do you see a market to begin with? And then do you see them as a possible investment?
Yeah, you make a great point about charting and measuring assets in Bitcoin. You can also make the same point about measuring assets in dollars, right? Like if you measure something in an inferior form of money, it's gonna look like a great investment, right? Like that's kind of part of the problem today is everyone thinks they're genius investors when they're really just comparing their returns in a debasing monetary tool. And I think that very directly applies to crypto broadly. Obviously, excluding Bitcoin, when it comes to something like XRP or Ethereum or Dogecoin or meme coins. My view on crypto and Bitcoin and just money broadly is economic systems converge on one best form of money. And they do this to solve the problem of barter, right? Like if I was producing bananas and someone else was producing apples and I wanted to exchange my bananas for apples, well, you would have to want bananas at the same time that I would have to want apples for us to actually facilitate a proper trade. And so when systems and economic systems and individuals get complex and we all specialize in producing specific products and services, we inevitably converge towards one best tool, the most saleable or most marketable tool to be used as what we all call as money. And this tool is used for savings and trade. And so instead of, trying to exchange what we produce directly with someone else for every single thing that we want in life, because we obviously are consuming a lot of different food, houses, different commodities or different services and whatnot, we go to this one intermediary tool, which we call money, and then we use that tool money to exchange for other things. And again, like we need one tool, right? Like that's the entire purpose. If we didn't need one tool, then we would just directly trade every single thing that we're producing for every other thing that we ever want. And that doesn't work. So you need this most saleable tool. And this most saleable tool is a natural shelling point on economic systems. We all converge on one tool that has the best monetary properties. Like I mentioned before, it's scarce, portable, durable, divisible, and fungible. And I think when you compare Bitcoin to gold, seashells, ray stones, XRP, Dogecoin, Ethereum, you start to learn that Bitcoin objectively has the best monetary properties. its monetary policy is immutable. It has the least amount of future uncertainty. The rules are the least likely to change compared to every other crypto. You'll have Ethereum. The rules constantly have changed. You had the DAO hack in 2016. You had Ethereum shift from proof of work to proof of stake. And there's been so many changes, and there could be even more changes with Ethereum. XRP is kind of the same thing. Dogecoin, it's literally just a meme. And I think like the world has kind of began to understand that like the crypto industry is kind of a joke, right? Like you've seen the rise of meme coins, and I think the rise of meme coins is kind of due to the market admitting that like, all right, there's literally nothing valuable here. Let's just admit that this is a casino. Let's be truthful and honest, and like we can still make money. Like if I sell this to you and I buy this token for whatever, and I know it's a joke and it goes up a lot, then I could sell it to someone else and blah blah blah. It's basically just a zero sum casino. And some people are attracted to casinos. Obviously, the lottery is a big business in the United States and probably throughout the world. So I think that that's kind of what crypto is at the moment. And I think that more people are starting to recognize that's exactly what it is. And again, I think there's not really a place for a second best form of money, because again, that defeats the purpose of money. It's to converge on one best tool, and I think that tool is very clearly Bitcoin at this point. And so I don't necessarily see a place for all of these other cryptos to maintain long-term value, especially when measured, and your point, like measured in something like Bitcoin. Like typically what happens with these altcoins is they have one crazy cycle where they go up a lot, measured in dollars, obviously, and then even measured in Bitcoin. And then for the most part, they just bleed out towards zero Bitcoin over the long run. Now, in dollar terms, it might look like they have these weird cycles and maybe it keeps setting a new all-time high. But in Bitcoin terms, they're literally just trending towards zero and arguably riding the back of Bitcoin, right? Like Bitcoin is being monetized by the world for a reason because it's the best form of money. And new people that are getting into the space don't recognize that fully. And so they're like, oh, well, I'll buy these other things because Bitcoin is going up. And then it's like, okay, well, that kind of has a somewhat, bad feedback loop where the price of XRP or whatnot goes up, and then that leads more people to think that there might be something there. But in reality, I think a lot of them are just riding the back of Bitcoin's monetization, and over time, it's very clear when you measure them in Bitcoin that they are trending towards zero Bitcoin.
I always say there is a difference between a trader and an investor, right? If you want to be an investor and your time frame is less than 10 years, you are a gambler. That's my opinion. And on the other side, I mean, nothing wrong with Vegas. I love going to the casino, having a cigar and a couple of mocktails with a couple of friends, but I know what I'm doing. I'm gambling, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to money and store of value, of course, I mean, I agree. Bitcoin there's no second best, as Sailor says. What's your view on stablecoin? Because stablecoin to me are an interesting topic because I do believe they are CBDCs. I mean, Tether, it's a basic definition of programmable money. I don't know if you share the same view here.
Yeah, stablecoins are a really interesting topic. One, it's interesting because they're talked a lot. One, like Tether is really interesting, right? The story behind Tether is kind of fascinating. Like you've had people like Bitfinex who have suggested that Tether is like a Ponzi scheme to some extent that never really has dollars and arguably pumps crypto or pumps Bitcoin would be their terminology. And I think that was kind of wrong. And now it seems like Tether is like a somewhat legit business or very legit business where you have like the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, Howard Lutnick, who's now basically leading Trump's sovereign wealth fund. He's gone out publicly and said that he holds all of Tether's dollars. Like he holds the T-bills that back Tether. And now same guy is literally running Trump's sovereign wealth fund. So it's like the risk behind Tether like went from like, oh my gosh, like this is a total Ponzi absolute scam to actually no, Tether is like one of the most profitable businesses in the entire world right now, making billions of dollars and millions of dollars per employee that they have. Do I think that like, I don't really know how stable coins are going to play out into the future. It's going to be really interesting to watch. Like I personally don't own any stable coins. I don't think that like, from my perspective, I don't need to own them. I can see the use case for foreign countries where people like want access to stable dollars, and they don't like necessarily Bitcoin at the moment because it's very volatile and the short term. Obviously, that volatility is risk in the short term, so that's not great if you're trying to like make sure you pay your rent for the next month or pay your input costs for your food business that you have. And so it's like those people are potentially using stable coins, but I don't necessarily have a use case for stable coins. So I don't necessarily even really care what's going to happen with Tether or USDC or whatnot. But it is very fascinating to see the market, develop, and to see Tether literally mint hundreds of billions of dollars these tethers of these stable coins, and then park the money in T-bills, short duration US Treasury bills, and earn the spread of, they earn 5%, they pay out their stablecoin holder 0%. And it's a great business for them. I don't know how long it will actually last like that, but yeah, it's been fascinating to watch it play out over the last 8 years or so.
I share the same view. I have no Tether or USDC or any other, not even DAI, which is a little bit more decentralized, but still the same soup, I guess. I rather hold dollars. Like you said, it depends on your what you live, and there is a bunch of variables. What I feel like they will play a very important role coming in the next few years. I think banks are going to start allowing companies and private people to even transact with stablecoin. It will be marketing for Bitcoin, right? So
Yep.
overall, I see the positive.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that like it. I agree that to some extent they kind of already are a central bank digital currency, or a currency that can be controlled by the government and frozen by Tether themselves, or the U.S. government telling Tether to freeze funds. And so yeah, it's like if they abuse that privilege and people for some reason continue holding wealth in Tether and using it to transact, well, it's just going to be a great advertisement for Bitcoin. It's like, well, now you might need censorship resistant money that you can send, and no government or entity or bank can stop you from sending it. And then also, in the same sense, it can't be censored. Your savings can't be censored, meaning like you can't be diluted when you hold Bitcoin. Whereas Tether or any sort of dollar derivative, you obviously can be diluted. You're getting diluted every single day. So I completely agree.
What was your view on the meme coin that Trump launched? Because I was not expecting that coming, to be honest.
Yeah, it's an interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. It's like I think I remember watching him in a press conference with like Sam Altman and a few of the other tech guys, and I think a reporter asked him, "I was like, sir, like you've made a couple $1 billion off your meme coin." He was like, "Really? Like I don't know much about it." I was like, that was kind of interesting for him to say that, and also kind of funny. He was like, "What's a few billion to these guys?" Yeah, I mean, like I, Trump, I think Trump himself obviously like doesn't really grasp Bitcoin or even crypto. I think it's probably like some people on Trump's team that were like, obviously like this is something that we want to be open to, like Bitcoin and crypto broadly is their probably their perspective, and they understand that like you can make a lot of money doing stuff. I don't know how ethical it is. I personally would not launch a meme coin. Uh, Obviously, like if you launch a meme coin and you pre-mine a lot of it and you tell people to buy it and then you sell your pre-mine, like that's kind of like selling a scam to people, in a way promising number go up to some extent, and then taking the money from those people when you sell your tokens or your shares. So I don't think Trump himself was like, super passionate about the meme coin project. I would imagine someone on his team was like, we can make millions of dollars doing this, and they probably have. But I do think that it's like what's good about just like Eric Trump talking about Bitcoin and crypto broadly, and then even Trump like talking about Bitcoin and crypto broadly, is like they're starting to fall down like the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And I always like to think that like crypto broadly is like top of funnel for Bitcoin. I think like when most people get into Bitcoin, even myself included, like you think you start to try to do all these other crypto things. You're like, oh, like, in the traditional finance world, I'm taught to diversify and buy a number of different assets. So why don't I do the same with crypto? Then you also start to think, well, Bitcoin is too slow. It's too expensive. Like, I'm not going to buy a full Bitcoin starting out. Like, I'm going to buy this XRP. It's a lot cheaper, or Dogecoin or Ethereum. It does something, right? So that's what people think. And I think that's just like the first step in initially falling down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. And like I mentioned before, when I compared Bitcoin to other crypto, I think eventually you start to learn that economic systems converge on one best money, and Bitcoin is the best money. And I think that's just, getting into crypto, which it's great when powerful people start to go down this rabbit hole. It's just like step one in initially understanding that Bitcoin is the world's best money, and it should be a very significant portion of your entire portfolio.
I love crypto because crypto is helping people to understand Bitcoin. Like you said, I mean, he will have a cost, right? A cost of tuition, which is the proof of work, I like to call it. So it makes sense. I agree with you. But Joe, man, I promise you an hour, so I'm going to stick with my time. Thank you so much. Guys, as always, in the description, we'll find, like I said, Joe's channel. Make sure to check him out.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, guys, for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.